This is the Balanced Advisor Podcast with Dr. Travis Perry, helping financial advisors like you achieve balance in their lives.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Balanced Advisor Podcast. Today I have an exceptional guest, Mr. Jeff Concepcion. Jeff is the founder and CEO of Stratos Wealth Partners, a firm which he launched in October of 2008. His intention was to create an organization to fulfill a need for sophisticated advisors and their clients. He constructed a firm with the infrastructure, resources, and support necessary to allow advisors to focus on their core competency, advising their clients. Today, Stratos specializes in the practice and performance of financial planning and implementation services. The firm has a national network of distinguished, experienced financial planning practitioners spread throughout the country. And your stats are incredible, Jeff. As I was looking at them online, you guys are killing it in so many different categories as far as being, an advisor firm. So thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you for the invite.
Absolutely. So we're going to get to some great questions, but, I think one of the first ones I like to do, I read your bio and everything, but how did you get into the industry? Sometimes I don't ask people this, but I think it's worthy of a question for you. Like, what was your path? How did you get to where you're at today?
I think like many others, I would say I stumbled into it. I didn't choose it. There were other things that I was interested in doing, and this probably wasn't on the list. I feel super blessed and grateful that I ended up here. But the job that I turned down that I wanted desperately was ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, to do undercover work. I shared that with my mom. I'm an only child, and I think she almost had a stroke about what was involved in disappearing for months at a time. And also, I would say during college, I worked probably 50 to 60 hours a week, zero balance, with balance being one of our topics today. And I was somewhat unwell, physically just burned out. So I took a very easy job with a company that had a wealth management division. And once I realized all the cool stuff happening in the field, because I was in a headquarters role, I made an effort within 9 or 10 months to move out into the field and begin on an advisor path.
Yeah, that's a little bit different than what you expected, right?
100%.
So, but now you just investigate people and their portfolios, a little bit of a different twist, I can see.
Very true. But grateful. I can tell you it's an amazing industry. One of our guys grabbed me in the hallway this morning and mentioned that he was going to multiple lacrosse and sporting events with his kids daily. And my comment to him was, how lucky are you? I mean, who can manage their schedule and work when you want to work and just make every single event? And it's incredible. It's a gift. So it's a gift.
Definitely a gift. And, you have your own RIA, you help other advisors. You also have the Evolving Advisor podcast, which I was a guest on. Tell us a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, it's just an interesting medium to share ideas. I love the business. I consider myself a student of the business. I have fairly minimal client contact now. My clients are advisors and firms that we try to collaborate with, support, and coach. And the podcast just turned out to be an interesting way and a very efficient way, as you well know better than I do, of sharing thoughts and sharing ideas and brainstorming with other folks in the industry. So it's been fun.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, and if anybody doesn't know about that, please jump on there. I mean, obviously, you probably do. You've seen them a lot out there, but the Evolving Advisor podcast, great stuff there. Well, so thanks, Jeff. Thanks for giving a little bit about the background. Obviously, we are talking about balance today. But, I get to kind of reverse roles on you and ask you about balance. And I love doing this because this is actually a lot of what I did to begin writing the book, Achieving Balance, which is out now. And with that, I've interviewed over 150 advisors. And I've asked them all the same question. And basically the question is, what is your definition of balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll start off by saying that it's something, and maybe I'd love to learn this from you. It might be something that comes naturally and intuitively for people. To me, it seems unnatural, but maybe that's just my own personal lens or personal experience. But I guess my definition of balance is having a reasonable degree of success in sort of multiple silos of life, with kind of health and family and fitness and work and spirituality and friendships. So it's just kind of having reasonable success in those silos. And I suspect the more success you have in certain silos, that probably could detract from success in other silos. But balance is kind of reasonable success, in my opinion, in a number of silos. And I guess what I found is people who are wildly successful in some, not always, but they're probably more prone to struggle in others. So I know I am, at least.
Yeah. And I was going to ask if kind of a follow-up, like if you felt like, okay, I'm reasonably successful, what are the areas that you think of first? What comes to mind about, yeah, as long as I'm reasonably successful in these areas, I feel balanced?
I think for me, there was always only two for a long time. It was family and work. And that was pretty much it. So when you talk about being out of balance, I probably had a decade, maybe a dozen years where I would say health-wise, I didn't take care of myself particularly well, because every free hour that I had, I was either working or focused on my family, my folks, my kids, my home life, my marriage, and work. And it wasn't probably until I was in my late 30s, I called it my baby weight, that maybe I put on, when we started having a family. I know boys aren't supposed to put on baby weight, but somehow I did. I went to the doctor and they said, gosh, this is out of line and that's out of line. And, they wanted to prescribe meds. I said, I'm not taking a single thing. I'm lazy and apathetic, not in my life, but relative to wellness. And I'll come back in 60 days. I came back in 60 days and dropped, not a lot, but 10 or 15 pounds, was eating healthier, exercising, and not surprisingly, all the numbers started to look better. And I never took any meds. And that was a wake-up call for me. Because I love exercise and I love working out. I would do it 3 times a day. It's just, for me, it's fun. It's not work. I just never gave myself the right to do that. And at that point, I had achieved enough success financially and business-wise that I felt it was something I had earned the right to do, was to give myself a little time for things that I enjoy, one of which was exercise. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. People talk about this a lot when we're focusing on themselves, trying to invest in themselves, right? And you're an investor. You invest in relationships and you help them invest in the markets. You invest yourself, you invest in your business. Yet the kind of a key that you mentioned there, I think for a lot of advisors too, is that they feel like maybe they have to reach some kind of business success before they can allow themselves to work on their health. So obviously that was kind of your path, and I feel you, man. I have sympathy weight too. That's what I called it. I called it sympathy weight. That's funny. But I think something happens when my wife, she's the one who typically makes the meals and keeps track of nutrition, is all of a sudden, out of commission for a while. The kids get dad and they get dad trying to make food, but you know what? My kids now are old enough, thankfully, that they can make a lot of their own meals and they keep me healthy now too. But, I think there's some of that sympathy weight or stress weight, whatever you want to call it. It kind of sneaks up on us, but you had a motivator there. That was medication, other alternatives that you were definitely a no-go on, which brought you to working out and eating healthier. So it's kind of interesting, and eventually allowed you to say, okay, I deserve this. What do you think is the issue there for most advisors, feeling like they have to have some type of event or achieve some type of success before they deserve it? Why don't you think they get started earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's hard for me to speak to other people. I could speak to myself. I think self-awareness is important. My mom used the word, to describe me in my youth as an extremist. I never really did anything in moderation. There's sort of an obsessive nature. If I work, I'll work like an animal. If I exercise, I'll exercise like an animal. If I'm going to spend time with my kids, I'm not going to sit at the games. I'm going to coach the teams and be involved in every practice. And, so for me, I was putting a lot of energy into the places I felt required it, and probably letting go of certain things to a degree that I thought I could sort of cheat with a little bit. The older you get, at least as it relates to health, the less it's probably appropriate to cheat, because the longer you cheat, you're going to be held accountable for not eating well, not exercising well. And I imagine it becomes more difficult to repair, the longer you go. So thank God the last probably, 15 plus years, I feel stronger and and healthier and more robust and more energetic than I did 15 years ago, today. So, and I think, I think to your point, it's just getting to a place where you feel you can allocate time to other quadrants that are important. But maybe we're willing to forego a little bit to invest a little bit more heavily in some of the other quadrants. So,
yes. So this idea of diversification, does it kind of come full circle as an advisor with your own life silos, as you mentioned, kind of these different areas of life, which I talk about, in the book a little bit, about, I kind of come up with 10 areas, which isn't incredibly unique, but after reading a lot of the literature, I found these are the 10 areas that really resonate with most people. But essentially it's 4 categories. It's health, it is relationships in some form, and finances, and then really sort of the spirituality or mental health kind of altogether. So these areas really do touch all aspects of life. And if you feel like one's out of balance, you've kind of explained what you've done to get back to balance, which is good. You're getting back on a regimen. And now, as you mentioned, you kind of never change it, right? You'd love to work out 3 times a day, and you enjoy that feeling. You obviously know a lot of advisors. You deal with a lot. You help a ton of advisors. I mean, how many advisors do you have in your firm at this point?
I'm not exactly sure. I would say north of 300, if somewhere between 300 and 350 advisors, if I had to guess, which is misleading, by the way. In a lot of cases, there's probably a lead advisor and then supporting advisors that are all fully licensed. So there wouldn't be 300 plus practices, but there are probably 300 plus licensed practicing advisors, some of which are sort of grouped onto teams. So, but something like that.
Yeah, wonderful. So if they're listening to this, or other advisors out there with our reach on the podcast, what have you typically seen with these advisors that you could tell, like, yeah, these are the typical issues that other advisors face? Because you've spoken about yourself personally, but that other advisors face about work-life balance. What are those things that you've maybe seen as you've worked with them and interacted?
It's interesting, and it's funny because I've almost put, as I'm thinking about it now, a little bit of a negative spin on this, in my mind, at least in terms of the way I see the script. But I think in our industry, advisors can do so well and build such nice businesses over time that I categorize advisors oftentimes as complacent. And I think that's my own sort of driver mentality. I think it's actually a very wrong and negative lens. It's maybe less about complacency and more about the fact that after a dozen years of doing the right things, when they stop doing those right things, they've probably gotten to a point where they can lead a good lifestyle, live well, not work particularly hard or kill themselves, and have balance in multiple silos. But it's funny because I'm so I have such this kind of growth / driver DNA inside of me. If I look at someone and don't feel like they're achieving what they're capable of achieving in all these categories, I look at that from a negative standpoint, but instead, really, maybe they've sort of earned the right to relax, not work that hard. And, so I think advisors achieve balance by kind of getting to a point that you and I talked about earlier, where they're comfortable with their lifestyle, they're making a nice living. People in our industry that in general aren't incredibly successful necessarily still probably make more than most senior executives at other companies because it's such a wonderful industry and a wonderful business. So I think over time people achieve, let me say this, if they haven't achieved reasonable balance, it's probably on them because they have the capacity to. Again, this notion of this guy who's going to several lacrosse games and or other sporting events with his kids daily. I mean, I can't think of a better definition of balance, to be able to honor family commitments. And that particular guy happens to work out pretty routinely. He runs a really nice business, makes a great living. And I don't think that's uncommon in our industry.
Yeah, I don't think so either. We have a couple of things that you mentioned, and a lot. I mean, this is not for, not everyone, but there is a big percentage of advisors with driver personalities like yourself, like myself, who are, wanting to improve and increase, develop. And so as you see these advisors who are maybe taking it easy or
Right.
slowing down. I think you're right. Maybe we do look at that as complacency instead of balance, instead of, hey, this is a better lifestyle. And I know some practices, more of like the boutique firms or maybe lifestyle firms are trying to create that from the get-go. Do you see that as a trend, by the way? Do you see a trend of advisors coming in the industry, maybe younger advisors, or is that just something that I've been seeing, sound off on that? Do you see a lot of advisors coming in trying to create that lifestyle of balance from the beginning of their careers?
Yeah, I think there's a generational component to that, right? So depending on where people grew up and how they see the world, I think folks, the age of my children, have a better view of what balance is. They're willing to do certain things and they're not willing to do others. And it's probably a good thing. It's probably healthy. I mean, I'm blessed that mine are extremely hard workers, but I think they're hard workers from a more balanced perspective than I would have categorized myself. So I have seen more folks coming into the industry in the last handful of years. For probably a decade or two, I didn't. That's because a lot of the training programs dried up. It was harder to get started. And people aren't coming in today as much building books from scratch like they did a couple decades ago when I got into the business. They're joining teams. They're becoming part of succession plans. People quote that stat all the time, which is kind of scary. One of them is attrition, the number of advisors in the industry, which has declined. CFPs over the age of 70, greater than CFPs under the age of 30, and all this other stuff that's out there, But I do think more people are coming in, and they should. I mean, I talk about this business to anyone and everyone who will listen, and I can't imagine, really, frankly, a better opportunity, a better livelihood, more freedom, the impact of helping people achieve their goals. I mean, we're really, really fortunate to be doing what we're doing. So
100% agree. It's a fantastic industry and it has changed. I mean, I began in 2002. I've seen a lot of change in almost 20 years, right? Of what's been happening, even with the CFP. I've seen a lot of change there. But these lifestyle firms and the new generation, what's interesting, what I found though, is there is kind of this pendulum where the previous generation maybe is thinking about leaving the firm or maybe building their firm still. They want balance, but they're a lot of times overworked, overstressed, overburdened. The new generation comes in, they've seen that, they don't want it. And so they almost push it away to the point where they say, yeah, I don't want to be tied to the work. I don't want to be tied to office. I work virtually, even before the pandemic, that kind of thing. But now they're stuck to their cell phones, their laptops. And now work is 100% all the time everywhere. And they don't have those boundaries. And they consider that balance, which it's an interesting concept because either, in my opinion, is on a very rigid end of the spectrum to a very fluid, flexible end of the spectrum. Where do you tend to see most advisors as you're recruiting them to your firms? Where do you see that most of them really lie? Or is it a pretty generational division like I've been seeing as well?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like an old person saying it, but I think it's true. I mean, folks who started out around the time that I did, most of them built their businesses from the ground up. It wasn't so common or so easy just to move into an existing practice. I had breakfast with a guy yesterday who's built a beautiful, beautiful business, almost $2 billion in assets. And it was from grinding and seminars and activity. And then he talked about the fact that as he now looks to exit the business at 60 years old, the 5 key people in his shop will have a pathway to ownership and real, meaningful income in a relatively short window, a half dozen years as they buy him out, which took him, three decades to build. But I think generationally that there was more of a grinder mentality going back several decades. People are more focused on balance now. And it doesn't mean that they can't be successful. It's just that they're probably willing to do certain things and maybe less willing to do others. And I'm not saying that that's not actually the right mentality. I think my mentality is that we all have a certain amount of work we'll need to do in our lives to achieve independence. And I was willing to front end load those hours that I needed to work to achieve independence earlier and sooner at the expense of certain things, but not at the expense of other things. So health and personal time would have been something that was at the expense of. As it related to family, absolutely unwilling to relinquish. But I was happy to miss sleep, miss workouts, take red eyes to make 2-day trips, 1-day trips. And I did that daily and weekly, and I'm grateful. I would do nothing any differently today, looking backwards, to be at the point in life where I was, which was a number of years back, to have kind of gotten to the point where I felt like I could be financially independent. I also had a chip on my shoulder, based on, I think, not wanting my mom and dad to work in the places that they worked, in factories, and feeling like I was not only trying to achieve financial independence for myself, but for others around me, and willing to kind of pay not whatever price, but willing to pay a price to accomplish that. And clearly that contributed to less balance in the early years. And again, knowing that in retrospect, I still wouldn't change anything. But
yeah, no, I appreciate your honesty about it. Balance means so many things to different people, but I like what you mentioned, like, hey, it's the physical health. I was okay for a period of putting that off, but that caught up to you. I was not okay with the relational aspects to put those on hold. That's a really big, important factor too. And even, you elaborate more on why. Have you read the book, The Millionaire Next Door, the revised edition of that with Stanley and Donko? They're PhDs. Have you heard of them?
I've heard of them, and I'm familiar with the book, but it was literally 15 plus years ago. And I would say skimmed would be a more honest depiction than read it. But I do remember the book.
So it sounds like to me that you're that second generation, maybe third generation, but probably second generation mentality where, you saw that your parents were struggling. You wanted to, become that successful person. You were willing to work really hard, which I think a lot now, the third generation is where it kind of breaks down. Well, I see, dad and mom are successful, so I'm not going to work as hard. So knowing where you're at, knowing that you were the driver, obviously you're looking at your own children, your own family, and, this personal question, Jeff, but what do you think, to help keep them focused on balanced growth, or, and this could even apply to advisors and their succession plan, their people. What is some good advice to help that next generation to continue the drive while also seeking for balance?
Yeah, so I have two thoughts. You talked about sort of foregoing health and then sort of fixing it over time. You don't get a second chance with your children, right? You can't forego that responsibility and think you can fix it. And if you break it, you'll suffer and they'll suffer in perpetuity. So in my opinion, you only have one shot to get that right. And that's our principal job. If you're successful in your job and you don't raise your children well, in my opinion, maybe this is a little bit hardcore, I think you failed, So the only judge of success in my mind is if your family is healthy and well-adjusted and productive and balanced and stable. That's really our only job. The other stuff is background noise. And I've spent a lot, and it sounds somewhat hypocritical because I spend a lot of time on the background noise, but never at the expense of the primary job, which is the family. Because I don't think that can be fixed. You can't just, and those values have to be instilled. So the other thing I would say is with family, I think we have to be diligent. I was obsessed with, as much as I was obsessed with being successful, I was obsessed with the notion of having kids that felt entitled, or that things would be easy, or that life was easy, because it's not easy. It's awesome, but it's not easy. So from the time that they were extremely young, instilling those values, having those conversations, people say that your kids are video cameras. They see and record everything. So just certain ways that I would act and behave and messaging with them was top of mind. So maybe it's no surprise, but I'm so grateful that they know what we have and they know what we built. From the time that it was appropriate to share it, I was fairly transparent. I was not transparent. I lied and I misrepresented when they were young. So my kids wanted to buy a little ATV at our horse farm that was $600. The lie was, we can't afford it. I don't have the money, but I can get $300 and you can borrow $300 each at ages 12 and 10 from a bank, and we can buy those ATVs. Now you have a $25 a month payment to make until it's paid off. Now they're looking to do jobs every month. And my daughter, God bless her, was 2 to 3 months ahead on her payments. And my son, 4 days before his payment was due, was knocking on neighbors' doors and freaked out that it was going to get taken away because he wasn't going to make his, So when kids understand the responsibility, they understand the work, they understand the labor, there's a greater appreciation and respect than all these, and it's not something to be taken for granted, and it's not something that happens without proactive teaching and accountability. You want to give your kids everything, but in doing so, I think you harm them. So I wasn't smart about many things, but I was smart enough to know that I could catch up and fix certain things, i.e. health and exercise. But if that runs away from you, it's awful hard to rein it back in. So.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned is crucial. I think you were fortunate that you had the time to catch up on your health. Some people aren't, and it does bite them. But you also talked about your priorities of family above your health, and so I like this quote that I actually chose to put in the intro of my book, and it's by David O. McKay, and he said, "No other success can compensate for failure in the home." That really just resonate like what you were saying about, the next generation really is your definition of success. Yet, how often do we place that on our business? With just our definition. Obviously, I'm a family person. I'm a family guy. Those are watching on the video, they can see my family in the background. And coincidentally, if this picture behind me, my family picture, represents my higher priority, and this picture over here, those you can see in the video, is a picture of a bunch of fishermen coming, setting sail to go out and fish in Denmark. I got this in Denmark while I was living there. That represents work. You can see the priority, the family picture is higher than the other. I do that on purpose to remind me where my priorities lie, because that it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, what they become. Who those little people become as adults is so important. And the lessons you were teaching your children about how to manage their money and their finances and to work hard, that will last them for a lifetime. One of the biggest things that I see with advisors as I help them with balance issues is so often it comes back to those lessons they learned as a kid or didn't learn, or the fears that they have, or the challenges that come from family relationships. So I think you struck a big chord with me, Jeff, and hopefully our audience. And then you could probably apply those same principles, right? Those parenting principles to those who succeed you in business. Could you not? Would you say those that you're succeeding in the business, you're just going to hand them everything, or are you going to help them to learn the principles that made the firm great? I would assume, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but I would assume you'd probably agree with the latter. But I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely applies. I mean, to have success in your family and have success in your business, to have success in your health, and a lot of it's driven, in my opinion, by discipline and commitment, right? So it's easy to not do certain things, which people will choose not to, right? But it's harder to have the conversation. It's easy to just buy your kid whatever they want you to buy them, or say yes to someone who's on your team, or to not, go to church on the weekend, or to skip a workout and sleep in. But every time you take the easy, so let me phrase it a different way. When there's an easy path or a difficult path, by nature, every time, I want to choose a difficult path. And darn near every time, I feel well rewarded for doing so. So it's having the difficult conversations, making the difficult decisions, following through on commitments to friends and to all these different things. And by the way, there are times when you're on a certain pathway, and maybe the difficult decision is to not stay on that pathway, be it personally, professionally, or otherwise, and to know that a change is imminent. But it's making difficult decisions when you need to make them. So, and then following through the best that you can. Life isn't perfect. I've screwed up many, many things. I will continue to. When I have difficult business conversations, I tell people, just know that there was no malice intended. I'm not saying that we did something wrong, and I want to make a promise to you. The only thing I'll promise you is we screwed something up last week. We'll continue to screw things up in the future. It's just part of doing business, but just know that there'll never be malintent. The second part of that, which is really important, is you will screw things up as well. And I'll always assume that there was no malintent on your part, and that I'll be understanding, and just know that. You can't hold me accountable in a certain way. Knowing that I want to treat you sort of with kindness, I will expect that you'll reciprocate and do the same. So I had a guy who was a very dear friend who passed away a couple of years ago. He was my assistant, I guess you would call it, for a number of years. And one of his takeaways was that I was tough on policy, but easy on people. The policy is a policy, but I want to be kind in the way that we discuss it, in the way that we interpret it, in the way that I share things. It's okay to be strict as it relates to policy, but you've got to be gentle when it comes to people, which is, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. That's my mindset. So
yeah, I love it. Strict on policy, but really kind and generous with people. It sounds like has served you well, and has served you well as you've built this top advisor RIA that's helped a lot of advisors, over 300 that are with you now. Tell me a little bit about how you help advisors with Stratos and with what you're building there, and a little bit about the balance that they can achieve by being with you.
Yeah, I think it's well put. I mean, the whole concept of being a successful advisor means that there are many hats to be worn. And most of the environments that people come out of, they're really focused on a couple things. They're focused on networking and business development, and they're focused on financial planning and client conversations. And sometimes what they take for granted in the desire to become more autonomous and more independent is that over the years, someone has been responsible for compliance, for billing, for benefits, for HR, for technology stacks, for real estate, for a whole host of things. And when you really want to run your independent firm, while those things are important, is that where you, as an advisor, and hopefully eventually more of a CEO, is that where you should be spending your time. So our goal is on things that are critically important, but not essential to your success between the advisor-client relationship. Might you not be better served to have someone do those things who could do them at least as well, hopefully better, with more scale and with more efficiency, and focus on really the couple things that are critically important that cannot be outsourced. And that's kind of the goal of the platform, is to help advisors focus on what matters, and to make sure that all the other things that need to get done, there are many of them, get done well without really derailing or bogging down the advisor.
Yeah, which that's what costs time, that takes them out of the efficiency scales, and it essentially can pull them out of balance because they allow themselves to be tied up in all of the minutia. So that's excellent. And I know there's others out there doing similar things, and I applaud you all for helping advisors to have better balance. If they want to go check you out and see what might be, something for them, if this is the right thing, where's the best place to get a hold of you, Jeff?
I think if they Google Stratos Wealth Partners, they'll see multiple websites associated with our shop. We have different channels for RIA only, for hybrid advisors. We have a separate channel, Stratos Wealth Enterprise, for advisors who are seeking succession or monetization, looking for a glide path to turn things over to the next generation or to a new operator. So probably any of those locations, they'd be able to get more information.
Excellent. So stratoswealthpartners.com. Go check them out. Great, very easy website to follow the path for information that you need. Thank you for being on the show today, Jeff. Thanks for helping other advisors to get a glimpse into what you've done. I mean, you've built an incredible business. You have a way to help other advisors while you're already building your platform as well. But you've made mistakes, you've learned from them. You have some principles, I think, that were really key for advisors to hear today. And, I appreciate your honesty and your time for giving that to us and for the audience.
Thank you, buddy. Yeah, it's a work in progress. I think that's the key, right? We never get where we're going. It's just sort of continuing on the journey and hopefully being a teeny bit smarter, in the future than we have been in the past, but it's all a work in progress. So
I love it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, buddy. Great to be with you, Travis.
You too.